Okay, so again, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Scott Carey, who is our presenter today. And he, again, is the first of our 2021 digital lecture series programs. And Scott's presentation is on the Truckee River, which is why you're all here today. But it's also the first lecture that's going to focus on geography of our space. And that's what the new exhibits coming into the museum in the next couple weeks will be about. The upstairs community room is going to feature an exhibit guest curated by Jack Hirsch. And that is focused on place names in our state and the Nevada Board on Geographic Names. And then the lower gallery in the East Room is going to feature an exhibit on sister cities of Sparks. And along with these exhibits, we'll have programming that is focused on these topics. So looking forward to a lot of interesting talks with all of you in the forthcoming months. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Scott Carey, who was generous enough with his time to join us today. Scott is from Sparks, went to school in Sparks, and is completely immersed in the history of our collective space that is Reno and Sparks, is super active in all the historic preservation groups, and really enjoys, from what I understand, sharing his knowledge with all of us, which is why I've requested his presence with us here today. So Scott, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Christine. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. It's a real honor to lead off our digital programming here at the Sparks Museum in these crazy times. Before I dived into my presentation here about the Truckee River, I don't think I'd be doing my job if I didn't put a plug in for the Sparks Heritage Museum. I'm a lifetime member of the museum, and I get to serve on the museum's board of directors. And I would encourage all of you, if you aren't already a member, haven't checked out the Sparks Heritage Museum, to come and support us. Basically, we are a community run, community supported, and volunteer run organization. And you can become a member. You can come visit us. We're at the corner of Sparks Boulevard, Victorian Avenue and Pyramid Way. And you can donate your time and your money and towards us as well too. We will take both.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess to jump into my presentation here on the Truckee River, this is I developed this a couple years ago with Dick Dreiling, who's on our board as well too. And so what I hope to kind of express to everyone today is provide a little bit about the history and importance of the Truckee River on our region, and also talk about two really historic and devastating floods that have happened in the area. I always like to begin these presentations by talking about the history of the region, and you can't start with any historic program without talking about the people that have been here for thousands of years and continue today too. This is a picture of the Great Basin. Nevada is home primarily to four bands of Native Americans. We have the Washoe, who call themselves the Washishu, the Northern Paiute, who call themselves the Numu, the Western Shoshone, who call themselves the Nui, which is the green area here, and we have the Southern Paiutes, which call themselves the Nuwu. They have lived in the Great Basins for thousands of years and continue today. Each has their own distinct history, culture, and traditions. But I would say that each of our tribes here in Nevada and the people of the Great Basin have a very strong connection to water. As we all know, the Great Basin is a very dry area, and water is very scarce. And the people of the Great Basin have been using rivers and wetlands and water to live, to have medicine for traditional and spiritual purposes, and have used the river to build crafts and art and artwork. The saying goes, "Water is life," and I think that's very important. It's very it talks to all of us as well too. The Truckee River is our main source of water here in the Reno Sparks region. As we all know, the Truckee River runs from Lake Tahoe and goes 116 miles north and east and ends out at Pyramid Lake. And it connects two important cultural areas of the Washoe tribe and the Northern Paiute tribe. The Washoe, the Washishu people have been living in Lake Tahoe for thousands of years, and they have a strong connection to the lake. They have a creation story that's centered around Cave Rock, which is a very important place for them too. And similarly, at Pyramid Lake, people have been living there for thousands of years, and there's a creation story for the Northern Paiute people that's centered on Pyramid Lake and the Stone Mother. Very important areas. Just to kind of put it in perspective, people have been using the Truckee River for at least 11,500 to 15,000 years ago. We know this because there are petroglyphs that were carbon dated a few years ago out on out at Winnemucca Lake, which before the construction of the Derby Dam, the Truckee River used to empty out into. They've carbon dated to be that old. That's some of the oldest remains and notice of human settlement in all of North America. And just to kind of put that in perspective, and it always boggles my mind how long ago 11,500 and 15,000 years ago is Western civilization. We kind of trace our history to ancient Egypt, and that's roughly 5,000 years ago. So you go back another 5,000 years ago and another 5,000 years ago. That's how long people have been using the Truckee River and have been living in this area. Fish, obviously are an important part of the Truckee River and have sustained, the Washoe, the Numu, the Nui for many years. And fish would actually spawn and going up from Pyramid Lake all the way up to Lake Tahoe. In spring out at Pyramid Lake is traditionally the running of the kiwi fish, which is an endangered fish. Is one of the first species actually listed as an endangered species when that law was created by this country. But there would be large gatherings along the mouth of the Truckee River as it emptied out into Pyramid Lake, and the Paiutes would catch the kiwi, or as they call it, the kuiyui fish. After reservations were established, Native American people, their lives were changed dramatically, and the experience that they have had has changed dramatically as well too. And when reservations were established, a lot of folks found it hard to support their families by learning how to farm on the reservation. So a lot of folks left the reservations at the start of the 20th century and moved to cities like Reno and Sparks. They lived on the outskirts while they were working in farms, they're working in cities, in industry. At the turn of the 20th century, a lot of the Native Americans who moved to the Reno Sparks area kind of gathered along the Truckee River on what was in the outskirts of town. In 1917, the federal government, in response to a quote homeless Indian problem, purchased 20 acres for $6,000 and established it as a place for these homeless Indians to live. After purchasing the land, the federal government came through and basically took a census of every Native American that was living there, and all the folks who were there on that one day became a member of what we now know as the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. And the Reno Sparks Indian Colony is comprised primarily of the three Great Basin tribes: the Numu, the Washishu, and the Nui. And they still can, and tribal members today still have a strong connection to the river. Here's a photo in the bottom left here of the Reno Sparks Tribal Health Center. And when the Reno Sparks Indian Colony built this facility, they decided to locate it near the river because of the cultural importance and the healing powers that the Truckee River has. Folks today who are clients at the health center still utilize plants and other species in the river itself as part of their medicine and to heal. Obviously, I'm not the best person in the world to be talking about the Native American experience of the Great Basin or the significance of the Truckee River to Native American people. I had the great pleasure in my career to work for the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe for 5 years and the Reno Sparks Indian Colony for 3 years. And through that experience, I got to know a lot of great people and learn a lot about the history and culture. So if you are interested in learning more about the Native American experience here in northern Nevada and the significance of the Truckee River, I'd encourage you to check out the Pyramid Lake Museum in Nixon. It's a great facility. The website is pyramidlake.us. For their hours of operation. Another great resource here is the Reno Sparks Indian Colony Cultural Resources Program. The colony is working on a cultural center. And for more information about that, check out rsic.org. So, the river has played a huge role in the history of the Truckee Meadows. And really, Reno and Sparks got their start as a lake or as a crossing for the over the Truckee River. Reno began its history as a crossing point over the Truckee River when Myron Lake established a lake crossing or crossing over the Truckee River for people who were coming from California and on their way up to Virginia City during the Comstock area, and a town eventually started gathering up. And Reno for a long time was actually known as Lakes Crossing. In Sparks, the first earliest settlement that we know of was in 1853 when George Stone and Charles Gates established a crossing over the Truckee River called Stone and Gates Crossing. The location of Stone and Gates Crossing was roughly where McCarran and Gregg Street is today. And a town after the crossing was established, a town grew up, and that later became what was known as the Town of Glendale. And in 1864, the Town of Glendale built the first schoolhouse here in the Truckee Meadows, the Glendale School, which was built in 1864, and it is in downtown Sparks today. And we do offer tours here at the Sparks Heritage Museum. Here's a photo of the Glendale Schoolhouse during a flood in 1905. I talked about the location of the Town of Glendale, and the school was roughly near where McCarran and Gregg Street is today, and it flooded quite a bit. The Glendale Schoolhouse was in operation from 1864 all the way up until 1958. One of the most famous alumni to attend the school was Patrick McCarran, who later became a senator in Nevada, a very important and powerful senator, and I would argue a pretty controversial senator as well too, but he went to the Glendale Schoolhouse was for his education. Another unique connection with the Truckee River and the Glendale Schoolhouse is this lady here. That's Bertha Raffretto, and she was a teacher at the Glendale Schoolhouse for many years. But she's most famous for writing our state song "Home Means Nevada." As you can see, it's in this picture, the location of the Glendale Schoolhouse in proximity to the river. She spent a lot of time by the river. So we like to think that, the line in the chorus of our state song, "Out by the Truckee Silvery Rills, out where the sun always shines," was greatly influenced by Bertha Raffretto's time at the Glendale Schoolhouse. Floods happen quite a bit in the Reno Sparks area, and it's a fact of life. And as much as we want to try to control Mother Nature, the river's going to do what the river's going to do. And in fact, over the past 110 years, there have been 11 significant flood events along the Truckee River. And the typical recipe for a flood along the Truckee River is a big snowfall, followed by warm temperatures, and then a lot of rain to melt that snow, and then you have a flood. This is a flood event in March of 1928 from a spring runoff, and it's just kind of great. You have kind of a sign of the times. You have a farmer here with his horses pulling out these modern, Model T Fords out of the flood. Flooding happened quite a bit early on in the city's history as well, too. And it was a big impact on a lot of the businesses, particularly in downtown Reno. This is an ad from 1938 from the Palace Club, which is a business in downtown Reno at the time. They're kind of poking a little bit of fun about how often it floods in downtown Reno with the two guys on the boat trying to cross Virginia Street. This is a shot from 1950, and in 1950 there was a big flood event as well too. This train is headed west towards Reno. This is the Paw Raw Mountains. And this is, Vista Boulevard and Sparks Boulevard today. Floods happen a lot in our area, and it hits Sparks particularly hard too. And the reason it hits Sparks too is because of this geological phenomenon known as the Vista Narrows. And so this is the Paw Raw Mountains. It comes down, it meets the Truckee River here. And then we also have on the right hand is the Virginia Range. And so where they meet is a really small area. And as the Truckee River goes out towards the East Truckee Canyon on its way out to Pyramid Lake, there's only a small area where all of this water can pass. Compounding this phenomenon too is there's the fact that there's two creeks that also drain into this area and into the river as well. You have on the Spark side, you have the North Truckee Drain, which brings floodwaters from Spanish Springs. It goes down what we now know as Sparks Boulevard today, and it empties out into the Truckee River. And then on the south, you have the Steamboat Creek, which runs along what we now know as the Veterans Parkway and into Pleasant Valley and into Washoe Valley, and it brings water from Washoe Lake all the way through, and it empties out in this area. So you have basically a river and two big streams all carrying water, and there's only a small area for all the water to go. And so when all the water can't go through, it backs up into the area and causes a lot of damage. So this brings me to the first major flood event I wanted to share with everyone today in this presentation. And this is the flood in 1955. And this is what the old timers called the mother of all floods. And this was the largest flood event in our region's history, and I guess we'll all do a digital knock on wood here to make sure that we don't have another flood event like this. But in terms of water, this was the largest. The recipe for this flood event in 1955 was an unusually snowy December, followed by warm temperatures and then a huge rainstorm. It is estimated that during the 1955 flood, 10 to 13 inches of rain fell through a series of storms in the area in only a matter of a couple days. To put that into perspective, 10 to 13 inches of rain is a ton of rain. Here in northern Nevada, we're lucky on a really good year if we get 6.5 to 7.5 inches of rain per year. In 1955, 10 to 13 inches of rain fell in a matter of a couple days and melted an estimated 3 feet of snow pack up in the Sierra. So just a ton of water that came through. And so by December 21st, these wet rainstorms kept rolling in, but the Weather Service at the time was not too particularly worried. They didn't forecast a flood because they thought that rain was going to become snow. We'd have more snow, but the business owners, they happen to know a little bit better. They've been through this, particularly in 1950 and other flood events. They decided to take precautions on their own. By the next day, the Weather Service changed their minds and their tune, and they decided to order sandbags and did start predicting a flood event. But it was kind of almost too late. By Christmas Eve, December 24th, there was 2 inches of rain that fell here in Reno. Upstream, up in the upper Truckee River watershed, there was 5 inches of rain that fell. And even further up into the Sierras and Blue Canyon on the California side, 9.3 inches of rain fell up in the mountains and melted a ton of snow. And all of this rain happened in just a 24-hour period and caused a lot of devastation. Here's a picture of what I call kind of the original crane guys. And they're set up in downtown Reno with the crane, and they're pulling out debris and tree logs that are coming down through this major flood event. And this is a really successful tactic that was used and is used for flood events today, to help prevent further damage to these bridge structures and flooding in the area. The flood in 1955 had a huge impact on the region and also hit the airport particularly hard. This is a photo of what was then known as the Reno Municipal Airport, which received 4 feet of floodwaters that covered up the runways and damaged their facilities here. This hangar is roughly where the Nevada Air National Guard base is today at the airport. The flooding from the flood in 1955 closed the airport for over 3 days to get all of this water to finally recede. And one important thing I think to think about when you think about the flood in 1955 is a huge amount of water, but the area and Reno and Sparks in particular was a lot different than what it is today. In 1955, the population of Reno was only 40,000 people. Sparks was still a small company railroad town of only 12,000, and the population of all of Washoe County was 90,000. The region was much less developed and it was more agricultural when compared today. Just to kind of put those numbers in perspective, Washoe County in 1955 was 90,000 people. Today, it's over 477,000. City of Reno is 255,000 people. And here in Sparks, it's 102,000 people. This is a photo of a bridge, and we're not really sure where this is. If anyone knows, please put it in the comments or let me know. But I think it does a good job of showing just how much water was coming through the river and how much of an impact it had on the area. There was a description in the newspapers during the flood in 1955 that Reno and Sparks was just really a giant bathtub with all the water coming through. This is a photo of the community of Lockwood, as it's known today as Lockwood. It's just east of Sparks in the East Truckee River Canyon. This is roughly where Interstate 80 is today. In those days, it would have been US 40. This is the railroad tracks. But the community of Lockwood, was all farmland, and it flooded very significantly during this flood event. After the floodwaters receded, there was just a ton of damage caused from the flood of 1955. And in fact, during the flood, at the height of the flood, the roads to the north, south, east, and west were all closed because of flooding or rock slides or mudslide. It was very devastated. The flood actually knocked out power to the whole area and cut off telephone service to the region and into California for a long time. And that undoubtedly hampered response times during this flood. Here's another shot of some devastation from the flood in 1955. Fortunately in Nevada, on the Nevada side, there was only one death during the flood. So it's just mostly property damage. But on the California side, over 48 people died from this major flood event. The flood in 1955 caused an estimated $155 million in damage and was declared a federal disaster by President Eisenhower. I now want to talk about another major flood event, and this is probably fresh in a lot of people's minds, particularly with this audience, but this is the New Year's Eve flood in 1997. In terms of water and the amount of water that came through the Truckee River, this is the fourth largest flood event in our region's history. Unfortunately, in terms of damage sustained and property loss, this is number one. This is the most damaging flood event we've had, and digitally, knock on wood, we don't have another one. This was classified as a 100-year flood event and caused an estimated $1 billion in damages to the entire region. The flood in 1997 has many legacies, and I'll get into those a little bit later in this presentation. But I think one important legacy that from the flood in 1997 is it really marked an end of an important era in gaming in downtown Reno. It really marked the end of major gaming as we know it in downtown Reno, and how it existed for roughly 70 years as a major driving force. Obviously, gaming is still going on in downtown Reno, and it's still a very important part of our economy. But compared to where today's numbers are, compared to where it was before the flood event in 1997, it's had a big impact. One of the with the flood event in 1997, it caused a lot of damage in downtown Reno, and that really forced a lot of the smaller casinos to close. You have the Flamingo Hilton, what was then known as the Flamingo Hilton. It's the old Bonanza. You had the Riverboat, the Virginian, Harold's Club. The Silver Legacy was built in 1995. And that really kind of marked the height of gaming in downtown Reno. But the damage sustained really hurt these smaller operators. And then starting in 1998 with the passage of some legislation allowing further Indian gaming and increased competition in Northern California, these smaller clubs and casinos really closed down, and Reno hasn't really ever returned in terms of revenue from where it was. Between the year 2000 and 2010, the gaming market and revenues of downtown Reno declined by roughly 1/3 after the flood in 1997. Here's a map kind of showing the extent of the flood of 1997 and where it flooded and how devastating it was. The yellow area here kind of shows the extent of the flood waters. But basically from December 16th, 1996 to January 6th, 1997, the region experienced heavy snowfall followed by warming temperatures and then a ton of rain that melted all of that snow. This created widespread flooding, as you can see from this. One of the interesting stats about the flood in 1997 is how much water came through and how much water was melted from the Sierra. Just to put it in perspective, in a typical year at Pyramid Lake, the lake will rise about 3 or 4 feet. From after the flood in 1997, all the water caused the lake to rise 12 feet. Pyramid Lake went up 12 feet as a response of the 1997 flood. Here's a photo of the 1997 version of the crane guys. Here they are set up on, I think this is Sierra Street in downtown Reno, and there they are pulling out logs and other debris to help prevent further damage and protect the area from flooding. This is an interesting shot I found from the Reno Hilton, what was then called the Reno Hilton, now known as the Grand Sierra Resort today. This is the Hilton Lake or Grand Sierra Lake where the driving range is. You can see the flooding and how much water was coming through, but I think this picture does a good job of kind of showing how the water breached the Truckee River and how it really devastated and hit Sparks, it hit Hidden Valley, and hit the airport really, really bad. And it kind of went on the east side of the facility. And so here's a shot from East McCarran, which is roughly right here. This is the University Farms facility. That's the Grand Sierra, and this is downtown Reno. But this just kind of shows the devastation and the path of where that water came. At first, similarly to 1955, the Weather Service wasn't really anticipating a flood. Their models initially showed that a colder front was coming in, and then that heavy rain was actually going to become snow. However, the fast-moving temperatures really came fast, and it was very unexpected. And the snow that was forecasted became rain. And I think a great picture that demonstrates how fast the weather changed, from it being snow and into being rain, is captured in this image here. This is an American Airlines airplane that had landed in Reno. It had disembarked its passengers. But by the time that they had, were ready to go again and take off, this plane was stranded at the airport. Just how fast the water came through the river and breached the river and covered up the runway and closed down the airport for a long time before it gets away. Here's another shot of the airport showing the flooding and these airplanes that were kind of parked higher up on the runway to keep out of the flood waters. Just absolutely amazing amount of water that came through. This is an image that I found from Channel 2's coverage of the flood of 1997, and it shows what Washoe Lake looked like, or really what Washoe Valley, which turned all into Washoe Lake. This is US 395, and this Carson City's kind of over in this area here. Now, one thing to remember, I talked about a little bit earlier, but Steamboat Creek drains from Washoe Lake all the way, into Sparks, into the Truckee River, and it connects there at the Vista Narrows. Like in 1955, roads were closed. Obviously, southbound was closed, but one of the big things that happened, there was a major rock slide on Interstate 80 heading west from Reno, which closed the pass for several days. Folks couldn't get over the pass into California because of this rock slide, and that shut down truck traffic. And so there was trucks parked all over the area because the pass was closed. And a lot of the truckers, were parked at the Alamo truck stop, and by the time the flood had come so fast, their trucks were flooded. There were even reports of truckers who decided to wait out the storm and wait for the road to open up at the Mustang Ranch brothel in Story County, which at the time was located right next to the river. So after a few hours of patronizing the Mustang Ranch, several of these truckers ended up coming out of the facility and seeing that their trucks were flooded themselves. I'd imagine that the truckers, had probably an interesting conversation with their boss, why their trucks were parked there in the first place. But perhaps the biggest impact and devastation caused from the 1997 flood was experienced in the Sparks industrial area. one thing that was different between the flood event in 1955 and the major flood from 1997 was that in 1955, the industrial area of Sparks was all agricultural lands. This area was widely developed by the city in the 60s and 70s. This was a part of a way to diversify the economy and bring new industry into the region. And so during the flood event here, as you can see, the water breached over and covered these warehouses and these industrial and buildings, and that posed a very significant public safety hazard and a threat to the community. All of these storage, all of these chemicals and other materials, were mixing in with the lake water or with the river water. This looks like a lake, but it's the river water. And sewage, and it was really, really dangerous stuff, and that really hampered, and caused a lot of devastation to these businesses. I think one interesting thing to look, just to kind of give you a flair for how high the water was. A lot of the water, came from the Truckee River, but also came underneath the water and underneath the roads, and actually popped out into the storm drains. You can kind of see here. This is a truck terminal, and the water level. There's several, they're several blocks away from the river, but it's almost to the top of the doors. Just a ton of water, a ton of chemicals, a lot of bad stuff. Very, very significant impact. And this is a shot I got from Channel 4 coverage of the flood event. And I love the old News 4 logo. They don't use that anymore, but this shot I think does a really good job of showing the phenomenon of the Vista Narrows. And, as I talked before, only so much water can go through the Vista Narrows before it backs up. And this is showing, how much water had backed up. This, if you can kind of give you some perspective, this is the Paw Raw Mountain Range. The Sparks S is right here, the Ralston Foods. This would be the East McCarran Boulevard. This would be the end of Rock Boulevard and the start of Pembroke Lane headed towards Hidden Valley. This is the University Farms area here, just all completely underwater. In normal circumstances, just to kind of give you an idea in terms of numbers of how much water was coming through. In normal circumstances, the Vista Narrows will typically handle there's about 6,000 cubic feet per second of water coming through, 6,000 CFS as they call it. When there's 17,000 to 18,000 CFS going through the Vista Narrows, that's when it starts backing up and it starts flooding the area. During the flood of 1997, it was estimated that the Vista Narrows was measured to have 24,000 CFS going through at one point. A lot of folks seem to estimate that the water going through the Vista Narrows might have been was probably a lot higher, and could have even been high as 28,000 CFS. We don't really know how much was going through, or how much above that 24,000 CFS was going through the Vista Narrows, because the gauge only went up to 24,000 CFS. And let's face it, the folks that were monitoring that gauge and the officials with the city and the area, they had some other things going on just because of all of the devastation caused by this flood. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about with the flood in 1997 is its greatest legacy, and I think that is the Sparks Marina Park as we know it today. This is a shot of a master plan from 1967 showing this is Interstate 80. This ring road would become McCarran Boulevard. The city always had a plan to develop this area as a recreation and lake area. This motel complex is roughly where Sierra Sid's truck stop and the Western Village Casino is today. In the 1970s, the Helms Construction Company started an agricultural or an aggregate mining operation on these former agricultural lands, and they mine the aggregate for sand and gravel that was used for construction materials to build roads and buildings in the area. This is Interstate 80. This is McCarran. Vista Boulevard is here. You can see the Sparks S. This is what it looked like in the 1970s, and through this aggregate mining operation, that's what created a lake. And so during the flood of 1997, officials were really worried about Truckee River water going underneath the Interstate 80 or jumping over Interstate 80 and further flooding neighborhoods in East Sparks. And officials were particularly concerned about flooding of the Park Vista apartments, which are along Sparks Boulevard. A decision was made to prevent further flooding from the river, and so they decided to dig a channel and divert water into the what was then known as the Helms Pit. You know, as we discussed before, the Helms Pit was a mining operation, and so they pulled sand and gravel. There wasn't much rock. There wasn't much of anything. So when you dump water into the lake and you drop it from, you know, several 100 feet here or so, it started to erode the banks of the river, and when it got or banks of the lake, and then when it got to the bottom, it started churning up. And this is a photo that kind of shows the churning up effect. And so when this erosion kept coming, it kept coming closer and closer, and eventually hit Interstate 80, where it took out a portion of the freeway. This is a better shot that I got here that kind of shows on the east side of the lake the channel that they built, and they diverted the water in. And you can see, you know, how steep these banks are, and, you know, with the churning in the water, you know, it eroded a lot of this stuff. So I'm gonna give it a shot here. I found a video doing my research of for this presentation today, and I found a great video from Channel 2's coverage of the 1997 flood that I kind of wanted to share with you, that shows kind of what was going on at the marina and the devastation and how it collapsed part of Interstate 80. So I'm gonna try to.
As we've been telling you, Sparks has been very hard hit by what's been going on there, and Tim Robinson has been out there all morning long, and he joins us now live with the latest information for us. Tim?
John, thank you very much. They are looking like they're about to stem the tide here as far as that small river goes that has degraded the shoulder of Interstate 80 between Sparks Boulevard and McCarran Boulevard. That water, the little river that is running right along the shoulder, as we've been telling you all morning, has eaten away, and a 100-foot chunk of the concrete freeway has fallen into the Helms Pit. The chunk that fell in is the shoulder. Tim, if you could just give people one more look way down there along the shoulder where we're standing. That fell in this morning about 5 in the morning, and since then the crews have really been working quickly to get things done here and stop, first of all, this water right here that is running down, and as it falls, cascades down 100 feet, 120 feet into the pit, it is causing some turbulence, and it's churning up down there, and in fact it is eating under the freeway, continuing to eat under the freeway. So what they're doing now, Nevada Department of Transportation and Granite construction crews, what they're doing now is bringing in these huge boulders. They are dropping the boulders into where the river is. That great big steam shovel there is digging up tons and tons of mud and dirt, so to put it here to make a small dam so the river does not continue to run, this makeshift river, continue to run into the Helms Pit. Here, this water here is coming out of a culvert on the south side of Interstate 80, on the side towards Reno and Carson City. It's coming under the culvert, under the freeway, and running down there. They dug a trench earlier today, so the water will go into the pit way, way down there. So once they get that water going down there, they get this dammed up right here, then they'll be able to better assess what it is they need to do to fill this great big huge hole that has been created.
You don't realize it at first. You're so busy worried about composition and how you're going to make the shot look. I mean, that as a photographer, that's what you are trained to think about. So you don't think about that, and until I got up to the edge and I held the shot and I looked around and then I opened up my left eye. Usually you keep it shut when you're doing shooting so you can kind of see what's going on. As I opened it up, then I could see everything beneath me, and the road dropped off 200 feet down to the bottom of Helms Pit. Water running down there. It is a sight.
There's a little creek on your V on your left now. I was watching it. Your road as I was watching it. Sharks, go northwest on the one.
For a while, there was some talk about closing Interstate 80 indefinitely. But as it turned out, they reopened the entire freeway in just 4 days' time. An amazing feat of engineering and human willpower.
So, the collapse of the freeway into the Helms Pit was a very significant thing, and the engineers had to get together and try to figure something out. These are some officials from the city and NDOT getting together, trying to figure out what to happen. They eventually devised a plan and brought in a bunch of materials, shored up the erosion that had happened, and replaced the part of the freeway that went through, and kept Interstate 80 going through. But I think this whole dramatic episode was really captured well in a cartoon that appeared the Sparks Tribune in 1997, where we have a reporter here asking an official with the city, Mr. Carey, who's my dad, Sean Carey. He was the public works director at the time and was responsible largely for the decision to divert the water into the Helms Pit to prevent the further flooding. We have a reporter here asking, Mr. Carey, any comments, and Mr. Carey, all he can do is, hands on his hips, dang, after the flood came through. But, one thing I think, another legacy that came out of the flood event of 1997 was increased regional coordination and sharing of information and resources and preparing for disasters. One thing, before the flood of 1997, the cities and the county, they all kind of did it on their own. So this was a big wake up call for the region, and this devastation that had hit the area. People started taking it seriously. In 2001, the voters approved a ballot question that funded an emergency operations center for the region, which has brought everyone together. And I would say that it's been very successful and it's been very good to bring and help respond to natural disasters in our areas. Another thing that came out of the after the flood in 1997 was the creation of a project to prevent flooding from happening like this again. And that work continues through the Truckee River flood management area. They have been able to complete some projects to help with flooding, but obviously there's a lot more to do and a lot more work that needs to be done. But perhaps the greatest legacy was the creation of the Sparks Marina Park. After the flood, the city was able to use federal disaster money and some settlement money they got from an oil company that had been polluting in the Helms Pit. They were able to combine this funding and design and build what we now know as the Sparks Marina Park, which over its time has attracted additional development. This is the Legends at the Sparks Marina Shopping Center. We have lakeside homes. Before the flood in 1997, we didn't have lakeside homes in Sparks, and the marina today is the most used park. It's the most popular park in all of the city, and it hosts many special events. That basically marks the end of my presentation. I hope you have enjoyed what I've had to say, and I hope you've learned a little bit more about the history and importance of the Truckee River. It is my hope that these pictures and stories shared from the flood in 1955 and 1997 have given you a new perspective on how dangerous the river can be and what a force that it is. As I've said before, the Truckee River has flooded 11 times over the past 110 years. It's gonna likely flood again. And at the end of the day, as you've seen from these pictures, the river is gonna do what it wants to do. And I think it's important that we are all prepared and we respect the river to help prevent further damage like that. The Truckee River is an important resource for us all to learn. I think we must respect and protect it as much as we can for future generations. Again, thank you very much for participating in our digital presentation today.
Thank you so much, Scott. Please know that we're all digitally clapping for you. As you mentioned, you can't really fight or fool Mother Nature, but you can work to modify landscape, which has pros and cons. And I was wondering if you can speak to, or do you have any knowledge about the work that's been done to the river in different places to help the water flow. I'm thinking specifically of downtown Reno and the First Street Bridge, and also the actual that area. And there might be someplace east of Sparks too that work was done, but I'm not sure if you have information on that.
Yeah, I think that a lot has been done with the flood project, and obviously that whenever you're working in a river, there's a lot of permitting, there's a lot of federal stuff that you gotta get done, and it's been pretty painstakingly slow, I think, for a lot of officials and Sparks and leaders. You did talk about in downtown Reno, they were able to put in new bridges, the new Virginia Street Bridge, new Center Street Bridge that are clear span, so you don't have the logs backing up and causing. But I think the largest and most significant flood improvement project that has been built to date is the Walmart on Glendale, right there by the Spaghetti Bowl across from the Grand Sierra. That was a partnership between the flood project and the Reno Sparks Indian Colony when they developed that site into the Walmart. They put in a flood wall that goes along the Truckee River, and that should really help prevent a lot of flooding in that area of the community. The Grand Sierra. This is taken from the flood event. You can see the parking lot and the water coming in that way, so that should help prevent. But from the large part, we still have the problem of the Vista Narrows, and there's only so much water that can go through that area, and the industrial area of Sparks is still very much susceptible to something like this in the future.
We have a question here. It says there's talk about doing something with the ditch trail. What's up with that? They say it's to help flooding.
I think maybe that question is talking about the North Truckee drain along Sparks Boulevard. I know that the city of Sparks did a few years ago put in a new channel that where the Truckee drain comes along Sparks Boulevard, goes out underneath, and then it used to kind of come in right here where Steamboat Creek is. It now comes in a little further down and empties into the river, so that should help with capacity, and it doesn't back up as much. But I think there is a plan right now to look at this section of the North Truckee drain and prevent it from flooding, and maybe help with the whole flood event, so we don't have this yellow popping up again in the future.
One more question to the mix, if you don't mind,
Sure.
which is we hear often the concept of the 100-year flood, but you mentioned that there were 11 floods in just 110 years. That's like a 10-year flood. So we're overdue then by that standard or that statistic for a flood. And should we all run and buy toilet paper? What should we do?
Yeah, yeah, that's funny. Yeah, and the 100-year flood event is a special designation that I think in terms of the law of averages, over the 100 years, you would have a flood that would be that size. It's not like, and this is a big misconception. After we had the flood in 1997, there was a big flood in 2005, I think, and a lot of folks in Hidden Valley who were severely impacted by the flood. We're like, well, we just had a flood. It's not like you have one flood every 100 years and that's it. Floods will happen because of upstream storage capacities, because of snow runoff and rain and unseasonably warm temperatures. It's a very serious thing, and I think it's important that that the whole region comes together. We had a flood event just a few years ago in 2017, and that really hit a lot of areas that was different than this 1997 flood event. You had a lot of canals and ditches, in Northwest Reno, and flooding in the North Valleys with Swan Lake. That was kind of a different experience than this. We in the region, we also have flash floods in the summer, and I think here in Sparks, I've seen it in my time when there's a big flood, when there's a big storm that comes and hits the Paw Mountains, and in a short amount of time dumps a lot of water, and then that water comes down some of those canyons and it empties out into Vista and Sparks Boulevard. It'll back up and hit the community. So floods are a very important thing, and we just need to be careful and be prepared for them.
Thank you so much for your time. This is wonderful. As you mentioned, and I should have mentioned that in the beginning, you are a board member and a strong supporter of this museum, and we appreciate you all the time, every day. Everything you do for us is so appreciated. And all the rest of you that are here in the meeting with us, as Mr. Carey mentioned, please continue your support. We appreciate you being here today. We'd love to see you in our museum in the future. And we have lots of new exhibits planned throughout this year. So we'll be advertising that in the coming months. And again, I mentioned the new exhibits opening in the next couple weeks, all geography based. And this was certainly a wonderful kickoff to our geography themed lectures for the near future. So I appreciate, Scott, you again being here today, and we look forward to seeing all of you at the Sparks Heritage Museum. And I guess I'll say good afternoon. Stay warm, avoid the snow, and avoid the floods. Thank you, Scott. Thanks, everybody.